Overview and Scrutiny Committee. I'd like to invite our Chief Executive, Ian Davison, to say a few words. Over to you.
Chairman, first of all, thank you very much indeed for giving the privilege of sort of going before your agenda almost. As many of you know, we're in the midst of a by-election tonight, so I am straight off to do some postal votes before doing the count. So thank you very much indeed for indulging me for speaking first. All I wanted to do tonight was, in anticipation obviously of your discussion a bit later on, is just talk a little bit about partnerships sort of a bit more generally in terms of what's happening, where it's going, and that may help for you in terms of some of the conversation to inform some of the individual answers which you'll be, obviously, questions and answers you'll be having with Councillor Placey, Councillor Stevenson and the committee. For so many councils, partnership is important, but it's not massively important. But for us, who have the challenges around poor health, low education achievement, low attainment in terms of people going on to further education, in terms of some of the economic drivers, our working in health is all the more important. As some of you have heard me say, we have an 18-year difference of life expectancy in this ward compared to Saffron Walden in the same county. You don't even have to go out of the county for it. And within the district, there's some significant changes. So our working as a district council becomes really important. And therefore, some of our investment work in that and making sure that our investments do deliver against it, and I know that's one of the questions, so I'm sort of almost setting that up for a discussion, if I may. Our work around making sure that our investment, whether it be our investment or whether we've been receiving others' funding and then utilising that for delivery, is important. And I think if you look at some of that work which we have been doing, it shows that we look at this as we may be a deliverer, we may be a facilitator of others, or we may be an influence of others to invest. And whatever they are, it makes a difference to the lives of our residents and makes some of those achievements in terms of addressing some of those key challenges we see for our residents. And if I can just sort of say is that we were given a talk, leading myself at a conference, and one of the questions was around partnerships and the importance of partnerships and just how much tendering puts into them, because we were asked to speak. And so what? Why do we do it? Why do we do all this fluffy stuff? And I'm saying it on purpose. I can feel Councillor Placey move, as I said this. Why do we do all this stuff? Why do we put all this money into it when there's so much challenges around local government, when there's so much, and how can we make a difference? But actually we can and we do. And that's the difference we make. And it's not just fluffy stuff, it is stuff we really achieve. And I'll give you one example. The health index for tendering, for the first time ever, has improved by 4.7%. The All England average has only improved by 0.8%. If you look at our neighbours, there's actually declined. And I don't say that as kind of gloating against our neighbours, because it's a challenge for all of us. I say it because of the point of view that this is not just a geographic issue, it's an issue about the work which we put in, the work which we're doing partners. To make sure that funding is delivering and is monitored is a perfectly legitimate question, and I know you've got that in there. But I wanted to just spend a few minutes just putting some context around is how important it is that what we do, rather than, and then the process, obviously, how we do it is then important to make sure that it gets the best spent. And I know that looking at this, if you look at some of the other ones, the diagnostic hospital. So Colchester to Clacton is the longest journey for the East of England Ambulance Service. The most call-outs for the East of England Ambulance Service is Colchester to Clacton in the whole of the East of England. So therefore, if you can reduce those journeys, you're helping our residents, you're obviously also helping the East of England Ambulance Service, and we're helping Colchester Hospital. In terms of the diagnostic hospital, which we have worked and supported with the health service, including getting people into jobs, which again is about an issue where we have people who are unemployed and looking for skills and looking for careers, that has 80,000 people a year go through it. 80,000 people. A significant number of those will stop those ambulance journeys. So again, it's about we work in partnership. Now, We can say actually, how closely we work with our alliance, which is the ICB, the new health structure, the alliances for all of North Essex, Colchester, and Tendring. And we could say, oh, we think we do it well, and you would turn around and say, Ian, you would say that, wouldn't you? But actually, the LGA did a peer review of it and said it. And from all over the country, they come to us to talk about our setup and about it's one of the best, if not the best, in the country in terms of the setup and that partnership work. And what difference does that make? Well, we're already seeing a number of different issues, such as we had the second highest rate of suicides in the country, and that has significantly dropped. So I just wanted to sort of, looking at the question, looking at the answers, I just wanted to put some context around how important it is for us, more so than for so many, because of the particular challenges around health, around education, around skills and jobs opportunities, but around the work which we are doing, which you as members are supporting, are voting for, with Councillor Placey, Councillor McWilliams before as the portfolio holders, taking that forward and those relationships we have. And the last point I will make is that we had a visit from DLUC, the director came with a team of 9 this week to talk to us about levelling up partnerships and what we were doing. And we presented to them about the work which we're doing, not just about physical asset type work, which is part of the levelling up funding, but also about the partnership work. And they were more interested in some respects around the confidence of the partnership work in the partnership delivery to coming and investing a further £20 million with us than they were just about bricks and mortar. Because you can have confidence in bricks and mortar, but actually it doesn't deliver anything if your partnerships don't support it. So let's, in going forward, and I will say this, and as the Vice Chair of the County's Health and Wellbeing Board, I say this, is let's take some of our badges off, that we're local government, that we're health, that we are police, that we're etc., and have that joint partnership work for what are the outcomes we can collectively. Because we can't do it alone. They can't do it alone. We can only do that around together. And that's why I turn around and say is that we're a deliverer, we're a facilitator and an influencer. And you will hear me say those words in lots of different venues to both encourage our partners to do the same, but also in the way we do it. So thank you for indulging me this evening, just to sort of say that. I've got about 5 other pages of that, so I could be here for another hour. I won't be, I promise. I'd just like to say is that thank you for indulging me on that one, but I just felt it was so important just to put some context around why we do it, and actually we do it well. I'm happy to take any questions if you want, Chairman, before, but I do have to then dash to start doing some postal votes.
Yeah, thanks for it. Obviously, if there is any major questions now, or we can put them in writing to you and do it that way. Free to go.
I'll take all the quiet on the Western Front
go.
and make a fast exit. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you.
Okay then. I just want to say a couple of words. I believe that this is the first time that this committee has been involved with budget scrutiny, and I understand there is a possibility that a remit, well, there could be a bigger remit, could be increased, but then again, time will tell with that. But any such increase will be in keeping with the different directions we've done this year as a committee. And that is obviously task and finish groups. We've had off-site visits, meetings, and so it's been very, very different. And I think we've had some quite good experiences with the people we've spoken to and also visited. So enough of that, we'll go on to tonight's business, which is going to change the agenda slightly. We're going to pull grant funding to after number 3. And then between 5 and 4, if you can get that, we've got the questions which members have put in. So we can then do those questions. But the first ones we will do the grant funding, bit first, to scrutinise the grant funding. and it's for the external partners and organisations. Um, so, without further ado, I'd like to apologies for absence and substitutions.
Chairman, we have an apology from Councillor Codling. No substitution.
Of interests. Question pursuant to Council Procedure Rule 38.
No questions were received, Chairman.
Okay, then we'll move on to item number 5, which is the grant funding from pages 15 to 40.
Under the declaration of interest, I just wanted people to know that I do some work for the hospice and I'm working on compassionate communities, so I'm just putting that out there. I'm not sure if it's a conflict of interest, but I don't want to be told it is and I haven't raised it.
Position. I'd like to invite John Fox to talk us through his very comprehensive report.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Thank you. Yes, if I can just talk you through the report, just to highlight that the report originally was requested at Cabinet last year when we were taking the Citizens Advice Tendering approval through, and at that point there was a request to have a wide review of grant funding, which seemed very appropriate. So just going through the report, it's important to note that the Council does allocate quite significant funding each year. It's really difficult to set a figure of what it does each year because it does vary, and some of the funding that comes to us from external partners will be set over a number of years as well. But roughly last year, there was potentially about £1 million from external sources which we could allocate, and from our own internal resources, it was around £750,000. This report focuses pretty much on the voluntary and community sector, how we're allocating funding to them. There is wider funding that goes on as well, for example, through disabled facilities grants. That's not really covered by this report. That's something completely separate. And some of the health inequalities funding has separate governance around it as well. So this is generally about how we're allocating our funding into that voluntary and community sector. And there's a real breadth of funding which is given out, and that talks through that in part of the report. So, for example, around the Tendering Community Fund, the money that was given out there, money given to Citizens Advice, Shared Prosperity Fund, which has a broad reach. We have a community asset rent offsetting scheme. There's some discretionary business rate relief, and also some part of the health and equality funding as well would also fall within this. For example, we provided some money to citizens CVS tendering around food and fuel vouchers. At the moment, funding tends to be allocated in quite a similar way, but not necessarily in a formal process. So we don't have a grant policy necessarily at the moment. However, when I was talking to all the services which allocate funding, there's a lot of similarities around criteria for people applying for this funding. So we tend to set criteria about application forms, approval routes, and those approval routes vary from Cabinet at one end through to members and working groups and portfolio holder approval as well. So it's quite a breadth there. What I think comes out in the report as well is about potentially formalising that a bit more and turning that into a grant policy itself, where we have some sort of overarching criteria which are directing us to say that's how we're going to allocate funding. As I say, I think there's an informal version of that happening at the moment, but it's not formalised in any way. I think there's also the opportunity to do something around governance as well, and make that explicit around, for example, if we're receiving substantial external funding, that it is actually formally accepted by the council, that we are going to use specific criteria, how we would follow MOUs and grant agreements. So there's an opportunity to bring in some wider criteria about how we allocate funding, and then specifically around a policy, those sort of things we would like to fund. I've put an example of a policy in the back of the report, but that's just a starting point really, to give some pointers about what might be relevant to be in there. But thought it might be worthwhile bringing to a committee and getting their input into that about what their thoughts are about what should be in a grant policy. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Any questions for John on his report? Councillor Griffiths. Chris?
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. John, I wonder if you could sort of, I'm a little bit not too clear on what actually the Subsidy Control Act is. So would it be possible for you to give us like a layman's introduction to that? And in regard to the Subsidy Control Act, can you actually clarify why, looking at that, we're not sort of affecting other markets and smaller economic units that may be outside. I mean, if for example, we take the Sunspot as an example, where we have a market space and small economic units, how does the Subsidy Control Act fit in the criteria in relation to other markets and other small economic units within the district?
With the subsidy control, I'll go through some issues with the Subsidy Control Act, and Lisa, if you can correct me where I might get this wrong, please. But there's a set of 4 criteria about what would determine what a subsidy is, and I can quickly run through those. So one of them is about, is the financial, so it's when we're giving financial assistance to somebody, is that given by from a public authority? Well, for us it always would be, so we're going to definitely meet that one. And if we meet all 4, this is what makes it a subsidy. The next one is around, is it conferring financial advantage on one or more enterprises? And an enterprise is determined as somebody who's offering goods and services on the market. So if we're providing funding directly to them, that's potentially going to be a subsidy. There's the next one is around, is it specific? So are we giving that economic advantage to a particular organisation, particular enterprise, or enterprises, or a group of enterprises? And the last one is about, will it have an effect on competition? To try and sum that up in layman's terms, how I understand it is, I think if we're providing funding to one particular organisation where other organisations could do that work and do not have the opportunity to access that funding, we're getting very close to what a subsidy might be. If we are going to pay a subsidy, which you can do, you must have a subsidy control scheme, an approved subsidy control scheme in place, which has to be published on a government website as well. So I think that I'm trying to sum up what subsidy control is there. Has that answered that question? Yes. In terms of the what's happening down at the Sunspot, I'm not entirely sure how to answer that question. Lisa, if I could pass over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Griffiths. The way I would respond to the question about the Sunspot is that there was essentially sort of like an open call for potential occupiers to apply to occupy the space within the Sunspot. So in that respect, we haven't distorted any competition, because what we've done is we've made it available to all. We had a set criteria, terms and conditions, so that was all open and transparent. The government's guidance on subsidy control makes it very clear that the more that you put things out to the open market and give everybody the same opportunity of applying, you're not conferring an advantage to anybody. Now, whether they decide to apply or not, that's up to them. So we need to make sure that as a local authority, when we are giving out money, or whether we are coming up with a scheme where some individuals or companies will benefit more than others, we need to make sure that we're doing it as openly and transparently as possible. Which is why we should avoid, where possible, doing direct awards to organisations, and that's what we should, as an authority, be moving away from, unless we have a subsidy control scheme, which is what the council had to put in place last year, to be able to give out the money to citizens' advice tendering, and that was subject to a cabinet report. The government put subsidy control in place as a regime to replace what was previously there in respect of state aid under previous European legislation. But in doing so, they've set up a framework, which means it's still very bureaucratic for local authorities and public sector to follow, and it's set down in legislation, and it's quite clear what we can and can't do. The government's view is that they have given local authorities more freedoms, because what they've said is that you can set up your own schemes. And those schemes have to be based on 7 principles. So once you've set up a scheme, it's based on 7 principles, it's registered, and the period of challenge has expired, then you can exercise giving benefits out in accordance with your local schemes. There's been a couple of decisions on this so far. It's a very, very new area, new piece of legislation. But what I would suggest, maybe what's come from a recommendation from the committee, more than happy to provide a fuller briefing on the Act to all members, because it is cross-cutting for a number of services. You know, it applies to discounted rents, you know, it applies to rates, so lots of different areas in the council it will apply to. So more than happy to give a more detailed briefing.
You're talking about a grant policy. Have you set yourself a time frame around when you would have that up and ready and implemented?
No, there is no time frame set, although bringing it to the committee is about how we try and take that forward, get the committee's view on that, and actually we'd want to move that forward fairly speedily. Thank you.
Got a couple. On page 17, when grant funding across accounts should be approved and report following the review considering the options available. Are there any other options set out as of yet, or is that to be decided? Page 17, yeah, purpose of the report, considering the options available.
No, so I think the options available were to consider, would we like to have a grant policy in place, or do we want to continue as we are at the moment, which is an informal way of doing it, which has similarities but not is covered by a specific policy.
What is the objective of a new funding policy, like under Appendix A2, for instance? So what is the? I think I've got the gist of what the policy is. Would you say, is that consolidation of all schemes, or?
So for me, I think what a grant policy will do for us, at the moment we've got a number of different services allocating funding across the whole of the council, and we are following quite similar processes across the council. They do vary to some degree because you'll have different levels of decision made. Say at some level it's cabinet, at others it might be members or portfolio holder. Although we could maintain that the grant policy, actually I think what a policy will deliver for us is a set of criteria which we all follow. So rather than having a more informal version which seems to work, we actually have a policy which means it definitely will work. So it's strengthening up our governance to make sure we're all following an appropriate route. And it then adds to transparency as well, obviously.
That is the big difference, do you think?
Yes, absolutely. I think that makes a significant difference. Everything works well when everything's working well, but actually our policy gives us a governance control to say that's the route we should follow. It's also something that officers and members can look at to say, are we following that process going forward?
Request that we review the external funding as well. So is that a natural progression with a new policy, new funding policy?
That's quite difficult because so external funding will be covered by MOUs in itself. So actually, if we set up a grant policy and say we want to fund in a particular direction, we could receive money from a partner who says, I'd like to give you some money to do this, but you must spend it in this area, which if we come up with specific criteria where we wanted to fund, could be outside that criteria, but they've still got the ability in their MOU to us to do that. I think in terms of reviewing our funding that comes in, I think the grant policy itself will do that because everything will have to run through that grant policy, and within that policy we could set criteria for what we want to spend money on. So I think it was going to end up being something around how we support our community, but it could be, we could set our criteria how we wanted to do that. I do make some reference in here as well about the more restrictive we have our criteria about where we might fund, the less flexibility we might have to respond to something that comes along. So, for example, cost of living crisis, or even COVID itself, actually required a response when that new thing came along.
Work to do to take that type of issue, as you say, COVID or cost of living, into consideration as far as possible?
So to my mind, I think a policy needs to set some criteria, some areas where we want to focus our spending on, but also leave a flexibility so that we can fund something completely different if we need to. So not be exclusive and say that is the only things we are prepared to fund. It needs to focus around the main areas we want to spend our funding, but have the opportunity to be flexible and fund alternative type work if necessary.
Would you like to give an opinion?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I agree with everything that John has said to the committee. I mean, obviously, in terms of the policy, we want to link into the council's corporate plan and the priorities, and obviously that will be part of any new policy. But obviously, we need to have a little bit of flexibility to respond to any emergencies. So I think, you know, that will be obviously the parameters of the policy, but it will be helpful if we have a policy going forward. I mean, the majority of external funds that we have coming in are all with MOUs, which again, we go through management team, those MOUs are published. We're very transparent. Everything we do around grant funding is published. So there's obviously portfolio holder decisions, there's officer decisions, there's reports that go through cabinet. And we're more than happy, obviously, to come to this committee at any time and give you summaries of any grants or anything like that. But to have a policy, it just adds something else to this, and it just sort of puts, you know, everything in one place. So we've got a clear way forward. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Yes, John, can I just ask you just a couple of questions on grants, the forms, etc.? Obviously, you're looking at the criteria of all these policies, etc. But I have had people that have obviously applied for different grants, etc., and find these forms not very helpful in lots of ways. I mean, have you sort of looked at these forms that maybe sort of updating them to make them a bit more user friendly?
So I think in terms of application forms, we do need to make sure we make it accessible for people to be able to access this funding. And I certainly know we have looked in detail, certainly with the Tendering Community Fund. We really focused in detail about what those forms should be like or what should be on there. I think it's going to link in to some potential criteria we might come up with under a grants policy, or even at the moment the criteria we're focusing on in terms of if we're thinking about the organisations we're trying to fund, what they're doing with the funding, what level of funding they might have already in the first place. So there's a number of questions we need to ask, but I do accept in principle we need to make, particularly if we're directing funding towards the community, we do need to make sure those are very accessible application forms and potentially have some variance in that depending on the level of funding as well, to try and make it, the lower the level of funding, the easier the application route is.
Gina, would you like to give you?
I don't think there's very much I can add. We obviously this is a draft policy. This is the first time we're looking at something like this. So we would welcome comments from the committee, any input, and maybe something that we could work together, officers, committee, and make it a joint ownership thing. Seems sensible to me. And just a thought with the application forms. Filling in application forms was part of my other life. And we used to attend workshops for people to go through how to fill them in. So maybe that's an option that could even go in the policy. I don't know, but I don't think that I can add much to what John and Anastasia have already said. Thank you very much. Okay.
Just one last question. Which the leader might actually. Will there be any increase in the level of funding? Do you envisage an increase?
An increase in level of funding? Are you talking from the council's point of view?
Well, I would guess anything else which we can. We're always looking to access external funding, aren't we?
Right. Okay. So I was going to say that I can't say whether we're going to get an increase in external funding because that would be beyond the council's remit to sit there and say how other organisations are going to spend their money. At this moment in time, the existing funding we have in place, I think, is part of the reason why we're doing this review. Going back to the cabinet decision last year around why we felt that this review was needed was because up until subsidy control, we were all very happy with it. We put out money on a regular basis. And then subsidy control came in and we suddenly realised that we might be in breach if we didn't have a look at this. We did have a look at it, we managed to sort something out, but we only did that for two organisations. And it was felt that we needed a better policy around this, a better sort of approach to it. And at the same time, it was time to, some of these organisations had been given money over a long period of time without actually saying, have we reviewed it? Has it delivered what we expected it to do? And so we asked for a review. I think part of the problem was it hadn't been done for a while and we didn't know what was the best way to go about it. And so it's come to the committee as a very, very light touch draft policy. And having listened tonight, and having been on scrutiny with you, Chairman, and Councillor Griffiths, I've always been conscious about the overview part of overview and scrutiny. And I've always liked a little bit of ownership, if I'm honest, when I was on that side. And I was always, should we say, frustrated when the Cabinet didn't let us have some ownership of some of the things that were going on. I guess what I'm saying is, if the committee, and I don't want to tell scrutiny what to do, because that would definitely not be Cabinet's place to do. But this is something that you could actually take ownership. You could actually sit there and develop this policy for us. You know, that's what I was hoping would be a really good idea from the scrutiny, and it's up for you guys to discuss, because there is a lot of good ideas coming out and a lot of good questions, and I think those need to be answered. And I think there's more questions to be answered. Gina herself had a few questions before the meeting that we were talking through about some of the bits and pieces that weren't in there. And I think from a scrutiny point of view, setting that up, having me and Gina back in a almost task and finish environment, call it a subcommittee, from this committee, rather than having to do the whole task and finish process, and just working through and delivering something for Cabinet would be how I saw scrutiny in the first place, as a critical friend and trying to help. So that was my suggestion, and I think that's possibly one of the ways I would look to go forward. So.
Chris.
John, just a quick one. Given that this year, at some stage, we're facing a general election and some of our grant money comes from national government, what happens if the government changes and we have a national change of direction? So some of the criteria that we're working with in our partnership arrangements and schemes are no longer part of the government remit. Are there cost pressures involved, or how are we looking to mitigate that?
So I think in terms of cost pressures, no, I don't think there is, because we would be allocating funding. Once that's allocated, that is given to an organisation, and then there would be no ongoing, so at the moment there is no ongoing commitment when we fund an organisation. We'll say, we'll give you this much money, but we won't keep funding you. And I think, as the leaders just alluded to, there's that whole issue of looking at where we might have funded on a regular basis, about let's review that and think how we want to do that going forwards. There may be a criteria change if there is a change of government. At the moment, those criteria are pretty broad, where they're coming down from government. So things like the Shared Prosperity Fund, they do give us quite a range over which we can allocate. So even if that changed, I think there'd still be a breadth available for us to allocate according to the principles we'd want to set out.
Okay, so I think we're going to move to a recommendation, and I'd like to propose that we go along the lines of a joint working task and finish subcommittee, name to be probably decided at a later date, and then obviously we need to know the number of members who will sit on that, and also obviously the lead officers and portfolio holder if necessary, depending on the setup. So can we get a rough idea of anybody who would like to sit on that? Crikey. Yeah. So we've got 4. Okay. So Chris. On the what, sorry?
The scrutiny committee, and it is quite difficult to understand, and I think if we could have a briefing on it that would be helpful.
Lisa did suggest it, didn't she?
And that was actually part of Lisa's suggestion.
If you don't mind, Chair, sorry, Lisa. One of the beauties of having your laptop in the meeting is I've already emailed the Chief Executive to ask for exactly that to be brought to an all members briefing. Yeah, it's as soon as is possible. So thank you very much.
I was just going to suggest consideration over whether it's a formal subcommittee or an informal working party from the committee membership. You know, I think the spirit you've had before is invite any other members who might be interested in the subject, rather than set up the formal subcommittee route. You're used to working in that informal sort of working party type process, so I would suggest that as a way forward.
So my recommendation is out the
No,
window.
no, I'm just saying that's just my suggestion to you, Councillor Steady.
That's exactly what I was thinking, actually. I'd like to go through my recommendation again.
So is it to, let's just check, so to, do you want to work in?
Just to explain on the remit then, the whole committee has to agree, or an officer in discussion with myself can agree. So if everybody's okay, we'll go down that route because that'll be quicker. And then we can do the remit and then we'll open it up for membership. Does that sound like a plan? Yeah. Yeah, yeah, it's okay.
I think as well, we just context within the thank you. Within the context of obviously the grant funding policy and review requested by Cabinet, so at least you've got the parameters there within the decision, and just the detail to be set up in consultation. Um, and also as well, we can always send it round to the committee members via email just to make sure you're happy with it before any decision is finally made. So you've all got the opportunity to comment as well. It will just save time because otherwise we've got to wait for the next committee meeting to get it set up otherwise. So do you
I so move. Second, we've got a plethora of seconders, and I think it's a unanimous. Classic action this day, isn't it? Taking action straight away. That's what I think anyway. Thank you for that. we're now going to go over to the questions and answers, which I'm sure you've all been waiting for. We're going to, so we've got question for the portfolio. Well, the question from the member of the committee we've had written answers. The member who has asked the question can have one supplementary, and if time permits, we could have another member, if they wanted to ask a supplementary, could. But I'm very wary of the time, so we just play it by ear, really. So we will go to the we will go to the questions, and the first question is from Councillor Griffith to Councillor Stevenson. If you wanted to ask a supplementary.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Councillor Stevenson, I note that we have, again, I mean, the stewardship arrangements of the Garden City development are something which, if we're not careful, could cost this council significant amounts of money. My main concern in all of this is where the actual scrutiny on these stewardship arrangements comes in, because although I accept that it's going to be part of the local plan and the DPD, by the time we get to that stage, in real terms, we've already decided we're going to build the building or lay the greensward, and the actual structure or public amenity is already going in. So in some sort of concerns, the Tendring Colchester Borders community have already made a decision. They've decided where the building is going to go. They've decided where the green space is going to go. And our planning committee suddenly get a plan application with the building or green space there and the stewardship arrangements already in place. Now, my view is that before the Tendring Colchester Borders community make the decision, Tendring District Council councillors should have some input into the stewardship arrangements and instruct the people who are sitting on the Tendring Colchester Garden Community Board what we actually want to see before they decide to do it. Because my view is that at the moment we seem to have a scrutiny arrangement where they make the decision and then tell us to rubber stamp it. Now that can't be right. In my view, this council should be instructing its representatives what we wish to see on the scrutiny arrangements. They should then be going off to the Tendring Colchester Borders Garden Community and carrying out this council's wishes. It should then be coming back through the DPP, and our planning committee, if they don't like it, should have the power to divorce the stewardship arrangements from the planning side of things and send it back so we can get stewardship arrangements that we like. Now that at the moment doesn't seem to be in there. And my view is that we need to have a more robust approach to stewardship arrangements on the Garden City community, because if we don't get it right, it could literally cost this council thousands. And my view is that there needs to be proper scrutiny before the decision is made, not a rubber stamp exercise after others have made it. So I look forward to your comments on the points raised.
So from all of that, you're talking about scrutiny. Is that what I've got? Okay. And partnership arrangements. Okay. Stewardship. So I think the best way to go about this is just to understand the process. So to put the stewardship in place, that cannot happen before, it has to happen, before we grant planning permission. So when you talk about things are going to be laid and this is going to be done and that's going to be done, that's not the case. The stewardship has to be sorted out now as part of our local plan as well, and that's why it's in there, is that it needs to be already in place. And if you're talking about scrutiny, I mean, that's what this committee's for. It's to look at the external scrutiny of all the organisations and bring those in. So if you wanted to scrutinise the stewardship when it's been done, you know, before the planning permissions come through, then you can do it. So it's also part of the S106 agreements. So it all comes together well before anything's laid down and everything else.
concern is that we haven't got the opportunity to scrutinise it before the Tendering Colchester Borders Garden Community Committee sit there and discuss it. Because my understanding is that some of the planning aspects of this have already been delegated outside of the district. And my concern is that we won't actually get to see the scrutiny arrangements till after outside councillors or bodies have already made a decision. So the idea would be that we set the scrutiny, the stewardship arrangements prior to it going outside, and that we give the scrutiny arrangements that we want to see to our representatives so that they can put it into the pot before the discussions start, not afterwards. And
Right.
as leader, that must give you more control, surely.
Well, we already have our people. So we have, in fact, two of your own group sit on there. One of them's the chairman of our little group, and you've got to understand the committee's made of nine committee members, 3 from Colchester, 3 from Tendering, and I think it's 2 from Essex actually. So that's the committee that sees that through. So that's delivering. I believe that's called the Garden Communities. It's got one of those really long names, committees. They're the people that will be looking through the stewardship. Latimer, they'll be doing that with officers. Latimer will be putting its own plans together. And now they've got sites all over the country. They've done this before, and there'll be a whole host of different options that are available to us, including things like parishes and adoption of parishes, invested people, those sort of things. And once that comes together, they will then come decide on what the stewardship should look like, and that will come before any planning permission comes. So there's the opportunity, and you can always, if you feel that you need to have an update, have members of that committee come here. I mean, it's not, we can, whether they'll attend, we'll see, but we can ask Culture and Essex to come as well, because they are part of that committee. But we are part of an external committee, and that's the thing. If you say, we have to have control, we have to do this, well, our control is those 3 people. That is our element of control. If you bring it back any further, then there's no point in having that committee. So we've put our very best people in. That's why Councillor Guglielmi, Councillor Cousins and Councillor Bush are on there, because I believe in, and they were the people on it when it was your administration, I believed in that continuity of that good work, and so I think we're in a safe pair of hands. Absolutely feel as a committee, it's your choice to scrutinise it if you feel that's the way to go forward. The stewardship, I think you need to let it play out a little bit. I think there will be an opportunity to scrutinise it. It's not right now. I think you can have your work plan come up in March. April, you'll be starting to talk about what your work plan is for the coming year. Absolutely put it on there if you think that's something you need to do. But at the moment, the stewardship of the garden communities, I think we're well on top of it. It's almost the very next thing we're doing, and you're a little bit too early with it, but I think if you're putting your work plan, you should catch it at the right time. And I'm sure officers will make sure that you do get the opportunity to scrutinise it if you want to. But that's down to your committee, not for me to say. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that. Because I do admire your tenacity, Chris, because we had the same, very similar conversation at the resources and overview last night, after you'd left, I think. And that was a test, really, because you gave virtually the same answer as what Gary Guyver said. And I actually made the comment about, isn't it a case of chicken or egg? What is going to come first? And I think Gary did actually quote me on that. So I think they've headed you off at the pass, Chris. So I think we can always bring it back. We know exactly what you said. We can bring it back on our work programme to sort of allay some of your fears. So I think it's in good.
I
good
don't
hands.
think it's a question of heading anyone off at the pass. I think it's a question of getting your governance arrangements right, so it doesn't cost this council and successive councils lots of money. Because if you take that these garden city communities have been going on probably now for over 100 years, there are a whole range of different experiences that councils have had over the last 100 years where frankly they haven't got their governance and stewardship arrangements right, and in some cases it's cost them significant amounts of money. So it's in effect trying to, shall we say, keep the leadership aware that there could be issues there and apply a set amount of scrutiny to make sure that we don't join the list of councils that have come unstuck with stewardship arrangements on Garden City communities.
Okay, maybe I'll rephrase my. You've probably headed them off in the past, because can you imagine? You know, they're really going to be looking at it now. They're really going to be looking over the shoulder and say, if that Chris Griffith keeps bringing that up, we're going to make sure it's going to get right. So I think you've set the marker, made some good points, and it's down to us. We're going to bring it back to here, and also no doubt you'll bring it up on the other scrutiny committee as well. Maybe we might want to do a joint scrutiny on that. You know, so covering both aspects. So without further ado, we'll move on. Oh God, you got another question, Chris?
Chairman, to be quite honest, I was quite impressed with the communication strategy. The only thing that I would hope that if we look at doing it again, we do make it clear the functions that TDC are responsible for. Because I know that a lot of sort of my residents in St James have got the impression that we have a magic wand to fix all the highways, roads and sort of pavements. Because actually in the consultation document that wasn't very clear. So I think it would be good if we do that, that it's made quite clear what our functions are and that we can't fix every sort of broken pavement in sort of Essex.
There's a question.
Can we make sure that we easily define what TDC's responsibilities are in further consultations so that our residents aren't confused with our roles and those of Essex County Council's highways?
Absolutely. Yes. Not a problem. Yeah, I agree with you, Chris. It's one of those areas where residents do mistake us for pretty much everything that's responsible, even government issues sometimes. We're responsible for absolutely everything, all the way down to finding lost people. My neighbours moved, and could you tell me where they've gone? Has been a recent request that came through my email box. So yeah, I think it is something that we should be aware of, but it's not the whole be-all and end-all of our communication strategy. It's just one element of it. And I think, in recent Facebook posts, things like potholes, somebody will sit there and say, when is TDC going to mend the potholes? There'll be 9 comments underneath it going, actually, it's ECCC, so ECC. And so the message is slowly getting there around potholes, pavements, street lights. But yes, I think it wouldn't hurt to every now and then point out that we're not responsible for some of the things that are failing, despite them taking the largest chunk of tax. Just have to get that in there. Thank you very much.
It's my question to Councillor Placey. Gina, so you've given a very good response. Just a couple of things. Concerning family solutions and deprived areas, I know there's probably how deprived areas are identified, but I know that there is a North Essex Family Solutions, and there's one just been opened, as you put in your answer, in Harwich, and obviously there's one in Clacton as well. But is there any other plans that you're aware of that they're actually going to have more of an outreach to have contacts in, say, some of the outlying villages? Is there anything in the pipeline that you think that could work? Anastasia.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for your question. In terms of Family Solutions, the Family Solutions team is part of Essex County Council. We have 2 officers that we employ as tendering district council. We second to that team. So that team covers the whole of the district. So it covers, all the towns, it covers the rural areas. It depends where the cases arise and where that support is required. So as I say, in terms of our appointments, we've got one member of staff that covers all of the areas, and we've asked one to specifically focus on Harwich. And that piece of work not only is around family solutions and casework, but it's also been undertaking a review of the community organisation and a mapping exercise, which has been particularly useful for us to sort of direct our resources in terms of, you know, where we put our support, but also for our partners as well. So as I say, that's been a really successful piece of work over the last year. The Family Solutions team, it's multidisciplinary, so there's also DWP workers that are in that team as well. So whatever support's going into a family, it provides support around, you know, it could be benefits, it could be, you know, getting back to work, it could be mental health. So there's a huge amount of support that's given to a family when they get that resource from Family Solutions. Thank you.
That was quite a good reply and answer. Is there any other on this? I think it was quite good. Is there any other supplementary questions on this one? Tony.
Thank you, Chair. I was just wondering, in terms of the Harwich member of staff, specific Harwich member of staff, will they be based in Harwich or will they still be based over here?
So I can answer that. So the Harwich member of staff is fundamentally based in Harwich. So most of her work currently is done in Harwich. As Anastasia was alluding to, she's helped form a community group as well, which is based in Harwich of different organisations there. So yes, it absolutely has a Harwich focus.
Thanks for that. Come on down.
I just really wanted to commend you on the thoroughness of your response, Gina. You've answered all of the questions I had. The only one comment that I would make is that I'm really pleased you've mentioned the policy, because I'm totally committed to you having a policy around grant funding. So the fact that you're going to look at ways that can assist people in filling in those grant applications as part of that policy process is brilliant. Thank you.
Gina, well, thank you for your answer. In regard to the first section where we were looking at a subcommittee to look at grants, it's not actually the procedure or good practices that we're actually looking to examine, simply because we know that they're in place, because a lot of this is government money and it has to be in place, otherwise Richard will jump up and down on us all. I think the issue is that looking at cost pressures, one way of actually offsetting some cost pressures is to actually get more money into the council. And one of the ways of doing that is through grants. So the suggestion was that if a subcommittee was formed where all the portfolio holders and their officers met with the subcommittee, then they could go through various grants to see what's actually coming in, and there may be some way in which we could work across the portfolio to maybe get additional money or grants, or maybe some of the criteria would fit into more than one box, which would mean that you could then access more funding. So the idea would be to maybe set up a subcommittee where the portfolios and their lead officer could come along, could tell the relevant committee which grants are in the offering, or which grants are part funded, or which grants are in the system. And there may be ways in which different portfolios holders, for example, leisure and the people that are looking after community aspects, could work together to access more money. So it was in effect an overview of looking at how this committee could help portfolio holders and the executive to keep track of what monies are in the system and possibly look at ways of accessing more, rather than looking at a procedural thing to make sure our policies are in place. And I think that was the gist of the suggestion why we were looking maybe to set up a subcommittee that met once every 6 months to actually look at what grants are in the system, look at where we were, look at the issues that were there. For example, the CCTV funding springs to mind when there's been a delay. One of the things, if you'd have had that in place, you could say, well, hang on, why has there been a delay when we were expecting it at a set time and it's overrun? And it's a way of maybe helping the portfolio holders and the executive to have a more of a fine touch on grants that are available, and also making the council as a whole more aware of what's actually in the system and how we can develop that, possibly with benefit to everyone concerned, including maybe even getting in additional monies. So I hope that the executive leader and your good self will look favourably upon that suggestion.
As as I've already said, like we'll take that back and look at it. But can I clarify? So you're talking a subcommittee from this committee to look at grants that are available that we may have missed, as well as looking at how we're spending the grants that we're getting.
I think that's the general gist. I mean, it's a subcommittee from the relevant scrutiny committees, because obviously that's cross-cutting probably across both committees. I'd leave that to the officers to decide where that actually sits within the structure.
Okay. We can take that back. Can I pass you over to the leader for his thoughts on that as well, please?
Of course you can. Not a problem. It's an interesting idea, Councillor Griffiths. I think if you really want to progress that, then I'm going to set up a meeting for you to come and discuss that with the Cabinet. I think I can see some initial problems with that. Discussing things every 6 months. Sometimes grants, we have it, the accelerated bid for Harwich and Dovercourt. 3 weeks we had for that to either accept it or not. So we don't get months and months and months to come up with possible good solutions and everything else, and we'll come round and talk about that. And another one was a swimming pool fund, where we only had 2.5 weeks to apply for that. Government's very good at saying, yep, you can have some money, and we'll tell you in 8 months' time that we want your proposal in a week. So without giving the details, I exaggerate, but it's just an example. So I can see some potential problems, and I'm happy to have a discussion, and it will be considered. But I think it's probably not going to come out in the iteration that you think it is. But it'd be interesting to have that conversation, and I can certainly arrange for Cabinet to have that conversation with yourself.
The idea is actually, I mean, that was basically, if you like, a concept. It's how you communicate which grants are within the system and how that communication is passed down. Now, obviously, in the world of grants, especially when you're looking at a political situation which is liable to change within the next year, I think we can safely say, given the fact we know we've got a general election, I understand that this is probably not the time to set that up, because the national picture is quite fluid and could change. So I understand that this may not be the right moment, given the fact that you're probably looking at a general election sometime within the next 11 months. But I do think that the concepts might be worth exploring at Cabinet to see whether or not there is some sort of system that you could bring along those lines. But I do understand what you're saying in regard to time spans. And I do accept that after 20 years in the local government, I know that everything isn't neatly boxed, and that some decisions have to be made at varying times.
Thanks for that, Chris. I think you've been a little bit cheeky there. Yeah, of course you can.
Yeah, government's quite interesting, isn't it? 1 minute it wants a decision made in 2 weeks, the next minute it won't tell you anything for 1.5 years. So I think why I wanted you to come to Cabinet is because you kind of hit on several different places with that. Starting from we could bring possible more grants to we should follow where the grants are going, and there was a whole plethora, can't even say the word, of different things. And I take your point, it's a concept. I think we sit with Cabinet, we'll listen to it, and then we'll decide whether that's something we want to take forward or not. So,
I think, Lisa, would you like to come in with them?
I was just going to suggest that maybe it's something that could be explored through the working party that's going to be set up, leader, and then you could also do it through that way. I was wondering as well whether there is something, picking up some of what Councillor Griffith said about the fact that the even if you look back at the grant funding report on the agenda, there's still individual grants and individual services being applied for, rather than looking at whether there's any overlap. And I think that might be something as well to explore through the working party, to see, well, how do we manage that? So, you know, as an organisation, how do we know if two organisations are getting money for a similar piece of work? So that could, I think, could be picked up through the working party, as well as maybe some of the other Councillor Griffiths' ideas, and then you could involve your cabinet through that as well, rather than have two separate things going on.
The last question is me again to Gina. So yeah, thank you for your reply. The only really the question I've got is the response is tendering community fund. What is the process for other grants given out by the council? Would it be the same process, or is there any different if they're like charitable things or?
I can give you an outline for that, because other grants, obviously, we have other governance and rules and regulations that we have to follow. So we'd abide by them. I haven't got the detail of what those other grants may be asking. Still a little bit new to some of these. So if Anastasia or John have got any more information on that? Yeah, thank you.
So I don't have detailed information, but I think, as I was alluding to earlier, the different parts of the council operate different ways of allocating funding. So tendering community fund, I think there was quite a strong review of the financial position of organisations they're allocating funding to. I think that varies a bit across the council, and I think it varies as well with the amount of funding. So the greater the amount of funding we're putting into something, and that actually flowed through with tendering community fund as well, the more robust were the checks on their financial position. I think it does depend who you're funding in the first place when it gets to low levels of funding. But my understanding is that across the council there is some basic measure of the of how good the financial standing is of the people we're funding.
The working group and the remit for that as well. So we look forward for the discussions on that. Okay, Richard, is there anything you want to add? And I feel as if you've been left out. You're quite happy not to.
I've got to say something now, haven't I?
Yeah.
Because I think, as you said, it's really, really positive, because actually all the things we discussed about the question that's just been asked around that is that there is a level of consistency to some extent, because we've got an internal control environment, that internal audit involved in as well. So we do pick up on stuff. But you know what? It's a really good, like you asked that question right at the beginning, what's this policy meant to do? It's actually a really good checklist, isn't it? Saying, have you done this? Have you done that for a service? Have you checked subsidy control issues? Have you checked the financial standing? So it's actually two things. It's one, really good governance, but also a really good checklist. So actually the work you're going to do, fantastic, and we're going to take that along, and then we've got that policy that we can keep live then, can't we? We can review it every 1 year, every 2 years, and it brings good governance to the whole sort of process. Because at the end of the day, I'm rambling on now, aren't I? Because at the end of the day, and I think this is always one of those things we say, it's almost like having 30 different businesses in one, isn't it? We're so diverse as an organisation, And it's really difficult to join all up, really difficult to join up. So it's never perfect, but this will go a long way to make and bring that consistency across the whole organisation. So it can only be a good thing, can't it? So yeah.
What Ian was saying with his little preamble about, with diverse, and so I think that's quite a nice ending, if you like, to the financial bit. If any of the officers want to vacate now, but you're more than welcome to stay for the last bit. Okay. So we're now on to item 4. Well, I'd love you to stay, but if you'd like to, if you've got a better offer, then. Okay. Okay. Yeah, I'll speak. Yeah. Anyway, thanks for your attendance and I think it's been really good conversations, really. Okay. So we're on to item 4 now, which is the delivering against the council's. Sorry. Council's. Yeah, the council's priorities on the corporate plan. So that's page from 1 to 14. Well, I've just gone through the themes for 2024-28 on the Our Vision. I looked through them all and I thought to myself, in actual fact, some of the work, what we've started, I think does sort of cover a lot of the themes. For instance, we looked at transport. We've got a task and finish. We're doing the we're tendering community transport. We've spoken to Essex County Council, and we've done a task and finish on that. I attended the regeneration board, which was with Essex County Council, and we discussed their bus strategy, and we're going to have another discussion on that. Terry's been doing a task and finish on education. We had the crime and disorder panel, and then we had and at that meeting was the police, and that led on to us having a visit to the police station, which was, I think all of us who went there found it really, really interesting. We had the fire service here. We had the NFU, National, about machinery being stolen from farms and that, and we've had neighbourhood watch as well. So I think we've had quite a diverse sort of programme for the first sort of 6 months, if you like. And then obviously we're still going to do future offsite, which is going to be the traffic police, and obviously on the NFU we're going to do a visit to a farm to see what the problems they have. And then and we're also going to have another visit to the police, which is going to cover the domestic abuse section, and that will be in with the CID about county lines as well. So, what am I trying to say? I think that the priorities, I think the vision, I think we've covered the main ones, 1 to 6, which has been adopted from the corporate plan. And I think we're really going to carry on. We'll review the task and finish groups at our next informal meeting. So, Terry, on your education, I'll give an update on the transport, and then hopefully we can then discuss the setup of the committee, what we've said tonight. I don't know if anybody else has got any views on the subject, or whether there's anything you want to add, or am I completely off the wall, or what are views? Or Chris, Chris.
In the delivering our vision document on page 11, we're working with partners in a town board. What exactly is a town board, and how does it operate? Because I'm not actually too sure I've come across that yet. As in a town board. So I'm not actually too sure what a town board is, or how we're looking to set it up, or how this fits. And we weren't too sure what happened with it there either. I was told to ask it here, Mr. Chairman.
Um, so I'll probably get the name of the funding incorrect, but one of the pots of money that was allocated by or announced by government for tendering recently was something like the town deals, a pot of money around that. And as part of that funding, which TDC can access, the government's paper requires you to establish a town board, and then that town board works with the community and engages with the community to come up with a vision for the area. And the government's paper is sort of sets out what they expect that town board to cover. We can quite easily circulate it to members of the committees. It's quite a simple I mean, you can actually Google it, it's on the website, but we'll get something sent round. So I'm not 100% sure, but I believe there might have been a report that went to Cabinet in December around the levelling up and funding. And there was reference to the town board in that Cabinet report as well, so we can provide a link to that for you as well, Councillor Griffiths. But essentially, the short answer is it's an initiative that government are expecting us to run with. The once the vision is agreed, then I think and if that's sort of approved as well, then you can access further funding to be able to deliver more for the area. But for the town board is definitely for Clacton and only Clacton. But yeah, there's more information in the government's paper. So the committee just have to confirm whether under the recommendation on page 2 of your agenda, whether you wish to provide Cabinet with any views and comments or recommendations for their consideration.
Well, go to that. On page 8, under the background support and information, I know that under background, paragraph 6 says each quarter there's a report delivered to the Cabinet, but the overview and scrutiny only get half-yearly reports. My suggestion would be that we request that when a report is sent to Cabinet, that a copy of it is sent to your good self, because otherwise we're going to be looking at one report in sort of half-yearly and 2 reports on the 12 months. So it'd be far easier if, when the report was issued to the Cabinet, we also got sight of that report, because that way we see what they see and it's easier to scrutinise. Just a suggestion. Because it was the same committee, and I want you to be as well informed as Councillor Honeywood.
So we've done the recommendations.
So you need to sort of move and second whether there's actually anything you formally want to refer back to Cabinet.
I would guess that. Do we have to make reference to the working group or the task and finish that we're going to?
No, that's going to be in there later.
That's all done.
Yes, that's in the earlier report.
So the recommendation could be then what Chris has said about the report under item 7 on the background. Half year.
Paragraph 6, wasn't it?
Each quarter, yeah. Sorry.
Yeah.
So,
So to request the report is submitted to both the Scrutiny Committee members
yeah,
as
yeah,
well as
yeah,
Cabinet members.
yeah, yeah. Are we okay?
Moved and seconded.
Yep, move. Second, yep. Aye, aye, aye. All in favour.
And no further comments on the priorities.
The only comment I would make is, basically what I've said is that we think that our work programme covers most of those priorities, if not all of them, in the work which we're going to do.
That will be covered in the minutes as well.
Okay, yes. I was just thinking we are ahead of the game. That's what we want to go.
Okay. Do you want that included in the recommendation then? That you've picked up a lot of the areas in your existing work programme?
Yeah. 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 I'm glad to see that we're glad to see the Cabinet took on board all what we said.
Okay.
Okay, that's it. We can leave then, can we? We can all go home now. Formally close the meeting. Sorry, formally close the meeting. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for everybody's participation.